Grow CFO is where finance leaders grow together. Join thousands of like-minded professionals using Grow CFO to access the combined knowledge and experience of the finance leader community. You can join us today, growcfo.net. Hello and welcome to the Grow CFO show. I'm your host, Kevin Appleby, and today I've got Adam Rakich with me. Adam, welcome to the Grow CFO show.
Hello, I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Adam, we're going to get into talking about data integration today, something that really gets in the way of all us accountants, particularly those of us involved in FP&A, and getting some good data out, or some good reporting out that pulls all sorts of data together. But before we get into that, tell me a little bit about you.
Well, I'm coming to you today from Brighton, but as people listen, they'll gather I'm not from England originally, and they'll be correct. I'm from New Zealand, here for the long haul. And I've been working in the technology space most of my career, and then most of that software for the Office of Finance. For quite a long time, performance management side of the house, FP&A, consolidation with tools like Adaptive Insights, now part of Workday, OneStream, Infor, all these sorts of guys. And now, these days, I work in the integration space.
Right. Now, the integration space. But as I said, as we introduced this, integration is one of those big issues for us folk in finance. You've written a book on the subject. Tell me a little bit about the book, Adam.
Yeah, well, look, even before I worked in integration, I knew this was a problem, right? So working, in FP&A and all these tools, they've all got to get data from one place to another, despite there being solutions for that. And there's been solutions for that forever, as long as there's been computers, basically. So many accountants are downloading from one system, messing around in Excel, and then re-uploading it somewhere else. And everyone who's doing that knows it's not ideal, but typically the alternative is just stressful to think about, right? Like, oh, it's so technical, it's involved. I don't even know where to begin. And I get it as well. I stick with what I can get my arms around, and I know. But that was even more pronounced when I started working specifically with integration tools, right? Just all day, every day, talking to people and just realizing there were a lot of common things that people didn't know. And there's all these people out there with business problems that could be fairly easily solved through integration of data, but they need to know, hey, what are the terms I should know? What are the questions to ask? I feel silly talking to people I don't even know what to ask. So that's where the book came from, was like, I'm having the same conversations all the time. Maybe if I put this down in a book, it could benefit some people.
Yeah, I very much get that. And we all have grown up with Excel spreadsheets. We know how to manipulate data. We know how to produce reports, graphs, nice things using it. In fact, I certainly know that as lots and lots of systems outside accounting start to have some very usable data in them, what they never had to start off with was a decent reporting function. So I've certainly been guilty of downloading data from lots of systems just to put it into a nice format to report it to somebody. And it goes on that now we have reporting packages that do that, but they've got to get their data from all over the place. So where do we start cracking this problem, Adam?
Well, where we start is we need to acknowledge the breadth of the problem. So actually what you've talked about is a really common example. I don't mean to pick on you, Kevin, but you say, well, I need to get data out into a reporting package. That is one very common use case, but it's almost never the only one. If you've got a CRM and a GL, CRM data has to get to the GL, and a surprising number of people are still doing that manually. If I have a payroll file that I get from my third-party payroll provider that needs to be journaled into the GL, if you're doing anything manual there, that's an opportunity. So I think because you want to do that, because only by thinking about every sort of use case that we can think about, can we start realizing how bad it is that we're doing it all manually. And I think certainly, it's like you say, everyone knows Excel, to put it mildly, right? Knows, loves might be too strong, as we always say, but we certainly know where we're at with it. But I think it gives the risk that people underestimate the problems of doing it manually. I always use a term, it's like Stockholm syndrome. It's not, but I can't think of a better way of putting it. But because people are so used to doing it with Excel, they just don't conceive of another world.
Yeah,
where
it kind of becomes, okay, there might be a bit of a chore around it, but it kind of becomes a routine process because you did it this way last month, the month before that, and probably as far back as you remember. So you know exactly what to do, you know it works, and you can probably do this piece of data extraction and manipulation with half your brain focused on something else.
Yeah, and look, and for better or worse, in the accounting profession, there's a lot of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and that has served professionals very well for a very long time, and that's fine. But I really encourage people to think more broadly about, well, what are we doing manually that we could be doing automatically? That's the first point. What are we not thinking about? And the one that gets missed the most, in my experience, is where one end is a file. Like I get a spreadsheet from someone, from a supplier, from a customer, from my payroll provider, whoever it is. People think because it's not two systems, it doesn't spring to mind to automate, but it should. Yeah. But then I think the next step to be thinking about is, well, what are the problems with that? Which is one of those things that sounds like it should be obvious, but I don't think it is. Again, my experience, because the obvious thing to look at is how much time it's taking you to do that. And I think that's pretty clear. Everyone knows it takes too much time to do things manually, and everyone knows we've got too much to do. Like it follows, done. And if you look at any integration solution, there will be case studies of how much time they saved X, Y, and Z. You do need to think a little bit broader than that, because what would we be doing with the time if we weren't? Rather than just, going to kick back on the beach, it's like, could I be delivering more value to the business? Could I be delivering better reporting, tackling a project, that sort of thing? But
and I think actually in that space, there are very good business cases at the moment for time saving. If you take what we're talking about now and some of the other things that we're talking about with the advent of AI and so on in finance, I think we've got an issue anyway to overcome, that there are a shortage of good people, particularly in the FP&A space. So if you can get more quality output from the people you've got, you possibly take away that recruitment problem. That to me is a huge business case.
Oh, I mean, it's cliche talking about doing more with less, but as you say, there's not enough people entering the profession. Everyone is going to have to do more with less. There simply won't be the accountants.
Yeah, and this isn't a case of we're trying to get rid of jobs. This is a case of, we're trying to get jobs done with the people that are available.
Oh, and the worst case, I mean, can I get enough? But the worst will be question of, are you providing a place that accountants want to work? Because there's going to be an increased demand for it. And if you say, if you come and join me, you're going to be doing grunt work for however long until you start to get to do the real analytical helping the business.
Yeah, and this is it. Grunt work does not light up anybody's fire.
Yeah, exactly.
Making the observation from the data once you've collected it, turning that into some kind of nice presentation, going into the board and convincing the board that they need to do something different, that's rewarding.
Exactly. And that's what people get into the profession for. It's not to copy and paste and pivot and things.
Exactly.
I'm sure there's someone who likes just those things, but not most people. Yeah. But the time saving is very much just one slice of it. We've talked now about making it a good place to work, which will be more important with fewer accountants. But the other two big ones are, of course, removing errors.
Yes.
Why does it take so much time? Well, part of it is you're doing the work, but then you're double checking and you're triple checking, and still, no matter how much you double check,
stuff that you do manually can lead to mistakes. Stuff that you do in Excel spreadsheets can lead to mistakes. You only need one tiny thing wrong in one formula in your spreadsheet, and you've got a problem. And I know that from bitter experience.
Me too. Well, for me, the worst experience in the world is that realization that you did that some time ago and that the data has been wrong for a while because of something you did in the background. So,
and this little problem has accumulated and accumulated and accumulated to the point that you've got a nasty story to tell about the real situation to somebody.
Exactly. So that's part of the question. And then if you save time, what else can you do? You can be more timely. I mean, it feels like I've been saying this as long as I've been working in software, right? We want to report quicker. We want more detail. We want it now. That story hasn't changed. Most businesses that I speak to do not get reportage as quickly as they want. And that's because at some point in the sequence of events, there is some sort of manual process that like, I can do this once a month or I can do it once a week. But if you want it any more than that, I just can't. I don't have the time to do it. But if you automate that, then all of a sudden you can say to the business, I can give you the up-to-date figures anytime you want.
Absolutely. So I can see we've got a very strong business case for doing this. Where do we start?
Well, I mean, the first thing, apart from that, we talked about, we got to think about what do we need to do? As I say, cast the net wider than you think. Think about, where do I take data from one place to the other? Where do I do that manually? Where do I download something, do something to it on the way, and then re-upload it somewhere else? If it's possible, it's often useful to talk to people who are on the other end of a process, like the people who provide you with data in the business, because they might be doing something manual that you don't appreciate to get you the data in the first place. And so that broadens the business case for the whole thing. But yeah, make a big inventory. And I say big because most people, when they sit down to do it, particularly if they start asking the questions of others in the business, it ends up being larger than they thought it was going to be.
Okay, so we have got potentially a larger problem than you think. And I must admit, my mind was in the space of, oh, what would I do the whole process? But I guess if you think wider than that, think anywhere that somebody else gives you a spreadsheet with some data on that you're going to use, where did the data come from? Or even when it's not a spreadsheet you're getting, is somebody else further up the chain doing something similar? Yeah. And this problem could quite easily multiply itself 2 or 3-fold.
Well, it's just because sometimes the bottleneck isn't on your desk. Like it might be that you get a weekly report from sales operations if you have a sales ops division, right? And it's in exactly the format you want because you told them it had to be. And yep, brilliant. It's here. I just load it into my system. But what you don't know is how many hours someone spent downloading from the CRM and then manipulating it manually before they handed it over to you. So that, even if it's not visible to you, it will still be a bottleneck to timely reporting. So then once you know what you might want to be integrating, well, then you can start looking at the options to not do that, to not do things manually. And the first port of call for that, it's a hard one because I mention it, but probably most people have already looked at it. Is there something built in somewhere to one of the tools? I've got a GL, whatever it might be, or I've got X tool, X reporting tool, whatever it might be. Does that say I have they call it native, they call it built in, they call it whatever. Will they just do it for you without you having to think much about it? Never hurts to ask your account manager in that space, but you do have to be careful with those. Right? You have to be careful with all of them, of course, but you have to be careful with the cost of it because I think and I certainly have been surprised, I sort of think, oh, it's built in. It'll just be free. And sometimes it is. Sometimes it's free software with no implementation, right? You just type in your username and password on both sides and everything's magic. But I have been surprised by how many built-in tools are more expensive than buying dedicated platforms for it. Yeah. Of course, you'll find that out pretty quick, but you have to ask the question. Similarly, is there an implementation around it? But the big thing you have to be careful with when you look at that option is what can and what can't it do? So I'm a GL provider and I say I've got a connection to X CRM as an example. For me, that's a side project. I'm most likely to just do the most common use cases for it. And if that's what I do and that's what you as a business need, then fantastic. But the trouble is, and again, something I've been continually surprised by is how many people don't fall into what is apparently what the majority want. And I think for me, a great question is just to ask, all right, there's this connector. What doesn't it do? Because anybody who's been providing this sort of stuff, they're going to know what the customers want that they don't do. And assuming they're halfway decent, they should be able to tell you. It's one of those things it's good to look in the future for, because it may be that you fit that little bucket now, but if in 6 months, 12 months time, you're planning on doing something else, which is outside that, you don't want to have made an investment in this bucket and then find out you have to just bin the whole thing. Because that's the big problem. It's all or nothing. Like you can't just go, oh, I'll just add a bit. No, you'll have to throw the whole thing out and start again. So that's often the first option that people will look at. The other option is to talk to your providers, not the software providers, but the firms who provide them for you, your resellers, because a lot of them will do something custom for you. They will build a connection, or they'll script a connection, or there's a lot of ways they could phrase it. It's a question of asking. But there are 3 costs that you got to make sure you're aware of. There's the obvious one. What do I pay today? There's the reasonably obvious one. Is there an ongoing annual cost? But the third one is the one that we don't like, which is, what is the mystery cost? What happens if I need to change something? What happens if one of my APIs changes, or things like that? So the custom one, you tend to run the risk of, if either of the APIs change on either end, that you'll have to pay to get it fixed up.
I've seen that one sitting, I'm going to our own Grow CFO business, where the membership system is separate from the online sales card. Sales card sends the membership system information. And turns out the interface, we bought the sales card because it advertised specific integration to the system we use. Found out down the road, after it'd been working fine for a little while, that they'd been relying on a bug in the membership system, their integration to work. Membership system fixed the bug.
Well, how did that pan out? Where did that wash out?
So just watch out for some of these things, because he's not necessarily having them custom built. It's 2 separate companies who don't talk to each other. You raise support tickets with either one of those, and membership systems say, yeah, the sales system was relying on a bug. Oh, sales cards support tickets says, oh, no, we send in this data in the way they said. They've changed their system. Didn't tell us.
Unfortunately, these things do change. Fortunately, changes of APIs on either side doesn't help you very much, Kevin, because you've just had it. But it is rarer an issue than I think a lot of people think. Because obviously we know software upgrades however many times a year, so people think, oh my goodness, the APIs are going to. But it's actually fairly rare that APIs get deprecated. They add new versions, add new things, but it's very rare they bin everything off because, well, they don't want the situation that you have where all of a sudden a huge chunk of customers complain. The funny thing with the custom ones, you might be surprised on the cost front. And I think when you think custom, you think scary, but actually a lot of the time it's not. It could be, but it might not be. So it's fine. Custom, people think might be expensive. It might be, but it might be cheap. Built-in, people think it might be cheap. It might be, but it might be expensive. So it's just a matter of making no assumptions on these things. Both of those options may or may not be useful depending on the sort of volumes that you're putting through and the frequencies that you want to put through a lot of data. Because again, side projects. It's either a side project for a reseller or a side project for a software vendor. Is it robust enough to deal with thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of data points? Now, look, in the finance world, we're mostly we don't normally need to move that much data, but it's always worth to ask the question.
Yeah.
Then, of course, you can stay with manual. You can look at your built-in options. You can look at custom options. Then, of course, you have the integration software, that sort of platform to look at. I would say, to start off with, similar thing with cost. I mean, when I first started in software things, I'd be thinking, $250,000 to walk in the door for, the old Informaticas and things like that. It's not like that these days. Again, it can be very affordable. But in the same way as everything, at the risk of sounding boring and repetitive, you have to ask the question. You don't know ahead of time. You want to know what you want to do before you talk to them, same as everybody. As with any software provider, I always say, well, first of all, let them give you their pitch, because I always find that it's very instructive to say, all right, hit me with your best shot and see what they come across with and what they don't come across with. How much they volunteer and how well that matches up with what you're thinking can be instructive, because if you tell them your needs, mysteriously, their product is probably fantastic at meeting all of your needs. So that's not integration specific, to be fair. And then it does become a bit busier with integration software, because there's all sorts of things that you can do with those things. But in common, you typically want to know, have they connected to these systems before? It's not a killer, but it's useful if they have. What sort of volumes do they have? And then how do I schedule it? How can I get notifications? All these things that are going to make the process work in a sensible way. But actually, with all of them, there's pieces like that you want to know. What's scheduling look like? What's notifications look like? Do you offer data quality? reporting. That's a loaded turn of phrase. Data quality, it can mean a lot. I mean, in my context, I normally mean, is there a way to check that the data is okay before we move along? I think in certain worlds, it means, is the data accurate? That's a different question.
But you want something, and one of the classic systems that I've used to do the sorts of things we're talking about is Zapier. Now, do I know that every time System A created a transaction that I was expecting to be zapped to System B, that zap actually fired? That would be my concern with data quality. Have I got a complete data set in both systems?
Yeah. So I have a lot of Zapier, if this, then that. There's all sorts of really useful tools on that. But those are the things that would worry me in the same way. And that really ties to what happens when something doesn't go the right way. And there's so many ways these things can go wrong. You need to know it will fail safe. And I think because I have no doubt, I'm not a Zapier expert, but I have no doubt that with a very skilled practitioner, they can make it fail safe. But I think that what they probably encourage, it's a simple thing, is zap one to here. I can't feel that it's bulletproof in the same way as you might want it to be. I mean, we normally recommend to make things bulletproof is you don't ever look at, so a lot of the time you can say, go and fetch whatever has happened since I last fetched it. You never do that. That's basically a recipe for problems. Because if you do that, the classic thing is, okay, I've got System A, System B. I go to System A, which has got a fancy feature. You can call it whatever. Let's say it's called bookmark. And I say, hey, System A, what's happened since we last spoke? And it says, here you go. And then it adjusts its little bookmark. And I've got that in my hand. I go to System B to deliver it. System B's down for maintenance. Okay. All right, we'll run it again in a couple of hours when System B's back up. And I go, System A, has anything happened? They go, no, nothing's happened, because it's moved on. It said that it's given you that data, but now I don't have it because I couldn't get there. So the robust way of doing it is actually you go to System B first and you say, System B, I would like all of the things for the past, whatever is a reasonable thing. Like obviously if we're doing account balances, what are the account balances? But if it's something more transactional, show me the whatever's happened in the past however many days. Get that first. Then go to System A and say, hey, what's happened in the past few days? And the same horizon, of course. You stick them together and then then you only pass through what's different, which is more annoying initially. It's not as nice and beautiful as, we'll just go from here to here. But it means that whenever that flow fails, the next time it succeeds, you'll be in business. And that's, to me, the measure of a successful integration flow. It has to be that if I push the button and it says success, that in that moment, everything is synchronized. That to me is important. If it says failure, cool, fine. It's told me. I'm not expecting it to be failed. But sometimes I've seen some attempts, it's kind of hatchet jobs where they go, it'll shake itself out because we can only do a certain number of records. So we'll have to run the process a few times before it's up to date. But in the Office of Finance, before anything else, we need to be accurate. We need to be comfortable that the numbers are right. So that's, to me, is number one priority.
Yeah. And making sure you check whatever it is you've pulled across is vital. And give an example of that. Actually, just this week, finished off a set of accounts for my daughter, run the small business. And for various personal circumstances, the activity in the business had wound down somewhat in the year I was finishing off. There's an automatic bank feed, which, if you don't renew your bank feed every 3 months, it stops firing in. And of course, it had done that. So I just went into the bank, got a hold of a file of transactions from the bank statement, loaded it up. I'd done everything to do with the accounts. And I was literally about to submit the finished accounts to Companies House. And I thought, I never checked the bank were actually reconciled. I just assumed that the balance in the bank account in Xero would be the same as the balance on the bank statement. I went and checked just before I pressed the submit button and actually found it was different. Reason? One transaction on the bank statement had been imported twice. So you've got to be extremely careful when you're doing things like this and pulling data from one system to another.
Yeah, and it's also, the thing is, and I think for all the right reasons, most accountants don't like wholly automated processes that they don't see. They're like, because they need to know that they're successful, they need to be able to follow it from woe to go. So there's a question. We don't want a black box. We want to be able to go in and see what came out of system A, what did we do to it, what went through to system B, and ideally for a period going back. Customers sometimes want the data to be purged from the integration platform. And it's like, well, no, don't do that, because you need to be able to go back and see what's going on. It's also about the first question for notifications is, did it fail? But actually, I recommend, certainly to start with, get yourself an email notification when it succeeds. Particularly, like, it's a great feeling to be able to sit down at your desk in the morning and you open up your Outlook and there's an email saying, yep, as of close of business yesterday, you're all up to date. You can now begin your day and do whatever it is that you want to be doing on that data, safe in the knowledge. But yes, of course, you always have to do some checking.
So, Adam, we've covered an awful lot there and made it sound ever so simple, which I'm sure it's not. You must go into a lot more detail than this in the book.
Yes, there's a whole pile of things that you need to think about. Ongoing maintenance in terms of mappings is a big one. What happens when you change your chart of accounts and all these sorts of bits and pieces. But yes, there's a lot more detail, which is hence the reason for the book. If you go and look for Google, and this is what I did, because I was like, I wonder what I can point people to. I'll Google data integration. I mean, it's a dangerous game. You either get on one end a lot of 5-minute blog posts from integration software companies that say, oh, it's incredibly easy and it'll save you £1 million, done. Or you get like 5,000 page data warehouse manuals or data mesh and data lakes and all these things that I'm only vaguely aware of. To me, there was a gap where I say, well, look, there's all these people, probably a lot of people that might hear this, that are not going to sit down and implement this themselves. That's not the plan. But they have a need for it. And it's essentially sort of a buyer's guide. Like, hey, what are your options? What do you need to know? What are the things you should ask ahead of time so you don't get a nasty surprise, like the mapping thing?
And that's got to be one of the key things to bear in mind. Mapping is just the edge of document the process. How many processes do we kind of put in place that end up in people's heads?
Mapping's a dangerous word. It's my fault for throwing it around. It means so many things. In the data world, integration world, it's about, all right, it's called this in system A. What's it called in system B? That's one type of mapping, what I'd call a column mapping. And then you have, well, in subsidiary B, the account is 4,000, but in the corporate chart, when we bring it in here, it needs to be mapped to 5,000. That sort of thing. And we know that, again, I enjoy a good cliche. The only constant is change. The more things change, you see where I'm going with that. There will always be changes in mapping. There will be new accounts that added over here that don't exist over here. You will never have a system that is 100% bulletproof. That is not the aim, but it's important that when it's been shot, it tells you and gives you the opportunity to resolve that issue in a timely way.
One of your issues where things start getting complicated and there are a few systems involved, I've certainly seen on many occasions where only one person has known the overview of how everything hangs together, but you've got lots of experts in little pockets of what's going on. And those experts know how to resolve something in their system, but have no idea of the consequence of that change on whoever's looking after the second system or the third system.
And that's where I think you tend to have the most. So with something like, and I don't mean to pick on Zapier, it's a wonderful product, but like that sort of area, that sort of self-serve piping type software, that's where I feel it doesn't have what a lot of business will need, which is that capability to respond to a change somewhere without just going. A good integration system, be it native, be it custom, be it a proper integration platform, will know that things will fall over and be like, this is what will happen. And if you ever speak to someone who is hoping to assist you with integrations in whatever way, and you say, what happens when this happens? And if they don't have an answer for you quickly, that is to me not very good, because every integration will fail at some point in its life. That is a truth. It does not mean it's a bad integration flow. It's just life. So we just need to know what the answers will be.
And we've all got our war stories of when these things have happened, where they've gone wrong. So if you're listening to this today and you know you've got piles of spreadsheets around that are moving data from one system to another, or you know you've got integrations that keep providing you with errors, I'd suggest the next thing you do is go and get a hold of a copy of Adam's book. So, Adam, tell me exactly what this book is called and where folk can get it.
It's not the snappiest title. It's called The Business User's Guide to Data Integration. I really tried to make it shorter, but the problem is if you take any sort of words out of that title, it starts to sound like either a technical book or not about data. It could just be like, I don't know, business transformation. Yeah. So for better or worse, it's called The Business User's Guide to Data Integration. It is available on any Amazon. It's a Kindle book. You can read it on Kindle. You can read it on a Kindle app. If you don't have either of those or no desire to install an app, you can actually read Kindle books through a web viewer on Amazon. It's not a massively long book. I think probably most people have read a lot of business type books that are about 3 times as long as they should be because they felt they needed to pad it out with the same thing repeated 50 times. I hate that, so I avoided doing that, kept it.
And I must admit, that's something that gets on my nerves in a lot of business books, where somebody gives you a concept and then tells you 3 stories about people dealing with this particular problem. And you can tell then Susie did this, Adam did that. And you can tell these aren't real people. These are made up people just to pad the book out. I'd much rather just get the concepts, know how to implement them, and get on with it. So congratulations on writing a short business book.
Well, thank you.
We'll put a link to the book in Amazon, in the UK store and the US store in the podcast show notes. So if you want to get a copy of Adam's book, just go on over to the show notes and you'll be able to download it. Adam, thank you hugely for being this week's guest on the Grow CFO Show.
Well, thank you so much for having me.